Before the story begins, ask yourself this. What would you do if the man meant to protect you decided you were worth less than a handful of cards? Stay with me, because this is not just a story about the Wild West. It's about what happens when one decent man refuses to look away. The year was 1871, and Dustwood Crossing, Kansas, was the kind of town that grew fast and rotted faster. A cattle stop slapped together from raw lumber and bad intentions. By day, it smelled of dust, manure, and sunburnt sweat. By night, it drowned itself in whiskey, cards, and lies told too often to feel like lies anymore. Inside the Iron Spur Saloon, lantern light flickered against nicotine-stained walls. A crooked piano banged out a tune no one listened to. Boots scraped. Chips clacked. Laughter burst out sharp and ugly, the kind of laughter that came from men who'd already buried their consciences somewhere along the trail. In the back room, away from the music but not the cruelty, Martha Crow knelt on the floor. She was 22, though hardship had already stolen the softness from her face. Her wrists were bound above her head to a ceiling beam, rope biting into skin already bruised. Her dress was dusty and torn at the hem. Her knees ached from the hard floor. She kept her eyes down, not out of shame, but because she knew eye contact made things worse. At the table sat Elijah Crow, her father. Once, he had been a decent ranch hand. Strong back. Early riser. A man who smelled of horses and honest work. But years of bad seasons, worse choices, and a bottle that never stayed empty had hollowed him out. Now he leaned back in his chair, boots on the table, one hand wrapped around a whiskey bottle, the other lazily resting near a pistol that had seen more threats than justice. The cards in front of him told the truth he refused to say out loud. He had lost everything. The cattle were gone. The land was gone. The saddle, the rifle, even the old wagon, gone. The men around the table waited, eyes drifting not to Elijah's face, but to the girl tied behind him. Martha heard one of them chuckle. Another tapped his cards like he was bored. That was when she understood something that broke deeper than fear. They weren't angry. They weren't excited. They were comfortable. Elijah slammed his last hand on the table. Silence fell. For a heartbeat, he stared at the cards like they might rearrange themselves out of pity. Then he laughed, a short, broken sound, and tipped his head back toward his daughter. Well, he slurred, words thick with whiskey and failure, she's all I got left. Martha closed her eyes. She didn't scream. She had learned that silence hurt less. Screaming gave them something to enjoy. The men leaned in. The deal was made without ceremony, without paperwork, without shame. Elijah promised she'd be delivered by dawn. Said he knew a spot by the river. A tree where no one ever passed before sunrise. Tied tight enough that she couldn't run. Couldn't fight. Couldn't be mistaken for anything but what they'd decided she was worth. Outside, the prairie glowed gold in the dying light. Horses shifted in their pens. A train whistle cried somewhere far off. Life went on, ignorant and uncaring. Inside that back room, a line was crossed that could never be uncrossed. And that is where this story truly begins. Because when society looks away, evil doesn't have to hide at all. Elijah didn't speak much as he dragged Martha from the wagon. The river lay just beyond the tall grass, quiet and indifferent, its surface catching the last light of day. A cottonwood tree stood alone near the bank, wide-trunked and old, its roots clawing into the soil like fingers that had been gripping this land long before men decided to corrupt it. "This'll do," Elijah muttered, more to himself than to her. The ropes came out fast. Too fast. Her wrists were pulled high above her head and tied tight against the trunk. Another rope snapped around her ankles and was drawn wide, forcing her legs apart until pain shot through her hips and lower back. The bark scraped her skin raw as he cinched the knots. She gasped, not from modesty, her dress still covered her, but from the way the position stripped her of dignity without ever touching her flesh. Exposure without nudity. Humiliation without words. The rope burned with every small movement. Her shoulders screamed. Her breath came short and shallow, chest rising and falling against the rough wood. The cottonwood did not bend. It did not creak. It simply held her there. Elijah stepped back, swaying slightly. He smelled of sour whiskey and old regret. "Buyer'll be here by sunrise," he said. "Best not make trouble till then." That was all. No apology. No goodbye. No hesitation. He turned and walked away, boots crunching through gravel until the sound faded into the prairie. Martha was alone. The sun dipped lower, spilling orange and red across the open land. The sky was too beautiful for what was happening beneath it. She watched the lights slide behind the horizon and wondered, quietly, carefully, if this was the last sunset she would ever see. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat. She fought it the only way she knew how. Breathe in. Breathe out. She focused on memories instead of fear. Her mother's voice humming while hanging laundry. The smell of soap and clean water. A time when hands had only ever reached for her in kindness. The memories hurt, but not as much as letting her mind run ahead to dawn. The wind moved through the tall grass, whispering and sighing. It sounded almost like voices, but none answered when she listened harder. Witnesses who would never speak. Witnesses who would never stop what was coming. Her wrists went numb. Then they burned again. Tears slid down her temples and into her hair, but she didn't sob. She refused to give the night that satisfaction. She whispered a prayer instead. Not a fancy one. Not a hopeful one. Just a desperate plea that someone, anyone, might ride this road before it was too late. Time stretched thin. Then, a sound. At first, she thought she imagined it. A dull rhythm. Slow. Steady. Hoofbeats. Her heart slammed so hard she felt dizzy. She strained against the ropes despite the pain, turning her head toward the river trail. The sound grew clearer, unhurried, calm, like the rider believed the world still made sense. Out of the tall grass emerged a horse, dusted with travel, its head low and relaxed. And beside it rode Nathaniel Reed. He was an aging rancher with a bent hat brim and tired shoulders, thinking only of broken fence posts and a sick calf waiting back home. He followed the river the same way he always did, out of habit, not purpose. Until his horse stopped. Refused to take another step. Nathan frowned and followed its gaze. What he saw pressed against that cottonwood tree froze him where he stood. A young woman. Bound. Bleeding. Breathing like the world was already ending. No decent man expects to see something like that. And in that single heartbeat, Nathan Reed faced a choice that would decide everything. Turn away, and stay safe. Or step forward, and invite a kind of trouble that never lets a man go. Nathan did not rush toward her. That was the first thing Martha noticed. He stopped several paces away, boots planted firm in the dirt, hands slowly lifting into the open air as if he were calming a spooked animal instead of a terrified woman tied to a tree. His heart hammered so hard he could feel it in his throat, but he kept his voice low, steady in a way only men who had weathered long years knew how to manage. "It's all right," he said. "I'm not coming any closer yet." The words broke something loose in her. Martha sucked in a sharp breath and twisted her head away, panic flooding through her chest. The memory of hands, rough, careless, claiming, rose too fast to stop. "Please," her voice cracked, thin and raw. "Please don't touch me." The request hung there, fragile as glass. Nathan didn't flinch. He didn't bristle or take offense. He didn't sigh like a man inconvenienced. Instead, he nodded once, slow and deliberate, as if she had just laid down a rule that mattered. "I hear you," he said quietly. "I won't. Not until you say it's all right." He slipped off his coat and held it up where she could see it clearly. Not close enough to frighten her. Not sudden. Just there. "I'm going to toss this over your shoulders first," he explained. "You'll be covered. Then I'll cut the ropes. I'll tell you before I move. You don't have to look at me." Martha opened her eyes just enough to see the coat, worn, patched at the elbow, heavy with the smell of dust and leather. It wasn't much, but it was something solid. Something human. She nodded. Once. Nathan draped the coat over her shoulders with care, making sure the fabric settled before his hands ever came near her skin. Only when she was covered did he reach for his knife. "Cutting the rope above your wrist now," he said, giving her time to brace herself. The blade sliced through. The tension snapped. Her arm dropped, numb and burning all at once. He worked slowly. Rope by rope. Knot by knot. Talking the entire time, not to fill silence, but to give her control over what happened next. When the last rope fell away, Martha's legs gave out. Pain surged through her hips and knees like fire. She cried out as the ground rushed up, but she never hit it. Nathan caught her, not tight, not possessive, just enough to keep her from collapsing into the dirt. She clutched his shirt with shaking hands, fingers digging in as if he were the only thing holding the world together. "I've got you," he said, voice firm now. "You're safe. Just breathe." She pressed her face against his chest, not out of affection, not out of want, but because survival demanded something solid to hold on to. Her whole body trembled, shock catching up with her all at once. Nathan didn't move until her breathing slowed. Then he helped her onto his horse, adjusting the saddle so she wouldn't slide. She couldn't sit straight, so he walked beside her the entire way back to his ranch, one hand steadying her leg, eyes never wandering where they didn't belong. No romance. No heroic speeches. Just decency. The lights were on when they reached the house. Eleanor Reed opened the door and took one look at Martha's wrists, the coat wrapped tight around her shoulders, and the way her body leaned into Nathan like she had no strength left to stand alone. She didn't ask questions. She simply nodded and stepped aside. Warm water was brought. Clean cloths. A quilt laid gently over trembling shoulders. Eleanor worked with the quiet authority of a woman who understood pain without needing it explained. Martha sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup she barely drank from, listening to the low murmur of voices, the soft clink of dishes, the normal sounds of a home that hadn't forgotten how to be kind. For the first time in longer than she could remember, her shoulders lowered. Her breath deepened. She felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Peace. But out on the prairie, night had only just begun. And in frontier towns like Dustwood Crossing, peace never stayed long without being challenged. The knock came hard enough to rattle the plates in the cupboard. Once. Twice. Nathan was already on his feet before the third strike landed. Some instincts never faded, no matter how many quiet years a man tried to live. Eleanor felt it too, the way the air in the room changed, the way Martha's shoulders stiffened beneath the quilt. Before Nathan could reach the door, a voice slithered through the wood, thick with whiskey and fury. "Nathan Reed," Elijah Crow shouted. "I know you've got my girl in there." Martha went pale. Her fingers clenched the edge of the table like it might float away without her. Eleanor stepped closer, placing herself between Martha and the door without a word. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just there. Nathan opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, closing it behind him. Elijah stood at the bottom of the steps, hat crooked, eyes bloodshot, swaying like a fence post about to fall. He pointed a shaking finger. "You stole from me," he spat. "You think you can just take what's mine and hide behind your wife?" Nathan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed calm. "She isn't property. And you know exactly why she's here." Elijah laughed, a sharp, broken sound that carried across the yard. "By morning, this whole town's gonna hear what kind of man you are." The threat wasn't the gun. It was the story. Eleanor opened the door and stepped onto the porch beside her husband, chin lifted, eyes steady. "That girl was tied to a tree," she said clearly. "My husband cut her down so she wouldn't die out there. You can leave now, Elijah." For a moment, the night went still. Elijah's gaze flicked to the window where Martha's shadow trembled against the curtain. His hand drifted toward his pistol. Nathan didn't raise his rifle. He fired once, into the dirt at Elijah's feet. The crack of the shot sent birds screaming into the dark. Elijah stumbled back, cursing, promising ruin, promising blood. Then he turned and vanished into the night, leaving behind the kind of silence that promised worse was coming. By morning, Dustwood Crossing was already buzzing. Men leaned in doorways pretending to sweep. Women whispered behind gloved hands. Every version of the story grew sharper, uglier, more convenient. Some said Nathan was a hero. Others said he was worse than Elijah. That was the danger of truth in a town that preferred rumors. Nathan rode into town anyway. He knew what it might cost him. His land. His name. His peace. Eleanor rode beside him in the wagon, spine straight, hands folded. Martha stayed back, safe, far from the stairs, but her story rode with them. In front of the saloon, the sheriff called the crowd in. Eleanor spoke first. Calm. Clear. Unflinching. She told them exactly what she had seen. What Martha had told her. Where the ropes had bitten into skin. When Martha's sleeves were rolled back, the marks spoke louder than any voice ever could. Elijah pushed through the crowd, drunk and snarling. Lies, he barked. All of it. The sheriff warned him once. Elijah smiled and reached for his gun. The street held its breath. Nathan moved, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because there was no other choice left. The gunshots rang out sharp and final, echoing off storefronts and startled hearts. When the dust settled, Elijah Crow lay in the street. No cheers followed. No relief. Only silence, thick and heavy and permanent. The sheriff knelt, checked for a pulse, then rose slowly and looked at Nathan. After a long moment, he nodded. Justice had been done. And everyone there knew it came at a cost. Because in places like Dustwood Crossing, doing the right thing doesn't make life easier. It just makes it possible to live with yourself afterward. Life did not heal all at once. It never does. The days after the shooting passed in a strange, careful silence. Dustwood Crossing returned to its routines, cattle driven, cards dealt, whiskey poured, but something underneath had shifted. People spoke softer when Nathan Reed's name came up. Some with respect. Some with discomfort. A few with resentment. Truth has a way of making cowards uneasy. Winter came early that year. The cold settled deep into the land and deeper still into Eleanor Reed's lungs. She grew weaker by degrees, the way a lamp dims when the oil runs low. Nathan stayed by her side through long nights, holding her hand, listening to her breathe, knowing every sound mattered. Martha helped quietly. She cooked. She hauled water. She learned how to move through grief without asking for anything in return. On Eleanor's final evening, the room was warm with lamplight and stillness. Eleanor squeezed Nathan's hand and made him promise one last thing. Don't turn hard, she whispered. And don't spend the rest of your days alone because you're afraid of living. Nathan nodded, tears slipping free despite his effort to stay strong. Eleanor passed with grace, leaving behind a house that had known kindness, and 2 people who would carry it forward. Martha stayed on the ranch. At first, as family. Then as her own woman. She worked the land. Learned cattle and fences and contracts. She saved every spare dollar in a tin tucked beneath her bed. When she finally bought a small parcel of land near the Reed place, the paper bore her name alone. That mattered. Time moved on. Seasons passed. Grief softened at the edges. Respect grew into friendship. Friendship into something neither of them rushed or named too soon. There was no debt between them. No rescue fantasy. Just 2 people choosing each other in small, honest ways. One warm summer evening, they returned to the river. To the place where the cottonwood still stood. Where ropes had once cut into skin and dignity had been stripped away. This time, there were flowers. A preacher. A handful of witnesses who understood what the moment meant. Nathan took Martha's hands strong now, steady, earned. No ropes. Only vows. Redemption didn't arrive with applause or celebration. It arrived quietly. And love, late as it was, still counted. So let me ask you. If you had been standing on that street, would you have believed the loud liar? Or the tired rancher who did the right thing when no one was watching? And in your own life, is there someone you're being called to stand up for, even if it costs you? If stories like this move you, subscribe to Frontier Tales, where the Old West still speaks, and courage still matters.